New digital technologies are driving a step change in enterprise business transformation. At the Digital Twin Podcast, we explore the intersection of technology and business. What should your digital twin look like? Hello and welcome back to the Digital Twin Podcast. Today, our topic is digital culture. Central to organizational culture and the digital culture is technology. But at the same time, there's a number of other things that impacts it, things that change because of it. And it's one of the table stakes of digital transformation. So we want to talk about it today, and maybe we'll start with a question here, Omar. Technology seems to be central to both digital transformation as well as the cultural change that comes about because of it. What are the key things that organizations need to keep in mind? What is it that they need to be paying attention to?
Well, technology is a key component in really accelerating transformational change within organizations. It's the one thing that keeps changing rapidly, right?
Yeah.
Every year, every few months, new technologies coming out, and they're trying to translate that. And how can I make my business more efficient? How can I become more profitable? How can I use that technology to my advantage, right? The faster you bring technologies on board, the idea is there that I can get that edge over my competition, or I can start to become more efficient and effective and know my business better, right? So technology is a very crucial piece of that. And it's really going to be focused around areas that can really help accelerate growth, do simple tasks that normal humans would do regularly in a much more automated and a structured way. Being able to put a systematic procedure in a way that it can be controlled much more finely tuned with software and technology. So you see a lot of areas in that, and with that, there's a lot of change there, right? There's a lot of, when we talk, you just mentioned organizational change, really driving this digital culture. You start to shift the traditional tasks, roles, and responsibilities of some of the employees or people to kind of be a little bit hesitant or affected by some of this. So, which kind of leads into that frame of mind of how technology affects people, which is another key component within this digital culture is, there's a lot of, fear and stigma around how technology is quickly evolving and adapting within organizations or being tried. And a lot of fear within that is people feel like they might be displaced by technology. You see a lot of things around that, and I mean, what do you think? I mean, when people talk about that, the fear of displacement, it's a very critical aspect around culture.
When you were talking, I was reminded of what's happening now, right? There's a lot of memes around digital transformation, and I think we've talked about it. Who is responsible for digital transformation in your company? The options are CTO, CDO, or COVID-19, right? I mean, a lot of people and organizations have been forced into change because of the current situation, and just let's say something as simple as being on one of the video conferencing systems today, right? Maybe folks are not that used to doing work on video cameras or standing or staying in front of cameras on conference calls all day, but the current situation calls for it. That's a transformation that you're quickly making as an organization, as teams of people, to now start to work in a virtual setting, but using different tools, right? And that's a big change. That's a big transition for people that haven't possibly done that before, and I see that every day.
Yeah, that's an absolute critical piece here, right? I mean, the COVID-19 situation has really accelerated, and not only accelerated, but really exposed the value of some of these digital tools that were once being talked about and say they're nice to have, but now they're need to have,
Right.
right? They become from a nice to have to a need to have to really survive in this new environment. So
And also come
that's
to
a
have,
big deal.
yeah, and they've also come to a recognition that a lot of work can be done remotely. People don't need to be in person, but also that means we have found better, more effective ways to collaborate, through virtual tools, right? And you give an example of, maybe having a certain digital methodology to do the data collection process or data entry process, or, that's also a very drastic change in how they go about doing their job every day. Um, and that's, significantly impacting people, right? And people, that is a big variable that we want to touch on next, which is how do people react, right? I know this is, near and dear to you. You talk a lot about people, and how technology impacts people. Like, what is your kind of, take on why is it such a big problem, what challenge when it comes to technology and people?
Yeah, it's most of it is obviously the displacement of it, but it's also it's a way of people look at its technology, a tool for maybe a micromanaging aspect as well. There's a lot of different ways that data
Am I
tools
being
can get looked
tracked?
at.
Yeah.
Am I being tracked? Am I being more productive? Am I being measured against somebody by some data metric or a KPI that only management knows about? And should I be participating in this? Therefore, the adoption rate uh, goes down and it never gets used. So the misconceptions and the stigma around some of these tools can be very alarming to normal people that don't have clear visibility and transparency of what the organization is trying to do.
Yeah.
Um, so, which is a very unique thing because more often than not, they hear the story that this will make their job more effective. They'll focus on more of the right things, that you won't be doing the mundane tasks like you were supposed to do. You just focus on the value added things. But but in reality, as you start shifting to more value added things, you know, you can't have 10 people doing value added things all the time without seeing value keep generating, right, from these value added tasks.
Yeah.
Therefore, the stigma and how that kind of translates, or that storyline, or that the adoption there can be very challenging, right? Then, I come back to transparency around these digital and technology tools. It really takes some transparency, but it also ties right back into the leadership of that transformation. When we start looking at, how this transformation is being brought down from a leadership point of view, right? We start talking about things like leadership style, right? How are they being transparent? What are they doing? What are they trying to achieve, right? And it brings back into that sense, what does that look like, from your point of view, from a leadership style, the people that are actually trying to drive these changes, digital transformation changes. I mean, it's a big, I mean, we had a segment on that alone, but there's a certain
Yeah.
criteria, or you might say framework around who might be, whether it's one person, a team of people, or an organization that's geared toward it, right? I mean, do you bring in all new people? I mean, you use the same people? All these different questions start to go in how you manage the change. And it's a very important point.
We did a segment on digital leadership. I think it was episode 3 or so. It's a good one to listen to if you haven't listened to. But you know, of course, you have to have a transformational type leader. I mean, I think we're making a very clear distinction between leader and leadership style, right? Um, there needs to be a digital leader that is transformational, leading the organization, reporting to someone like a CEO, right? Someone who is overall responsible for the organization. But then you can't have one person bring all that change all by that person, right? By by a person or a team under that person, unless that team is cross-functional and you have clear responsibilities and accountability assigned to various functions within the organizations that are also responsible for driving that change. And so, one of the things we talked about is, before we came on the segment, is does every person that is responsible for that functional leadership need to be a transformational leader, or is it about something else like a leadership style that needs to bring about the change that's necessary?
Yeah, I think that's you know, each organization has, their own cadences, culture, how things operate, right? Norms. You're really challenging some of those things with some of the technologies, and you're right. It takes a transformational leader, and a good argument could be made that you really need a transformational cross-functional leadership team
Mm-hmm.
because you know they're driving the functions themselves to change, which in a lot of ways are set in their way, right? Uh,
Yeah.
we've a lot of companies that are going through transformational change. They don't, you know, they've been through this. They've been growing for years, and they're trying to change a ship that's been going down this path for
Yeah, and
years,
they're
right?
focused on their job. You can't blame them for
Yeah,
what they're doing. They have a very specific task at hand, whether it's engineering, marketing, sales, whatever it is, right? They have a very specific focused task at hand, and so you can't blame them for really hyper focused on it, right? But then they have to be open. Their style has to be open to change, meaning, like, you've come across leaders in your lifetime that are probably not open to failures, right? If something fails, they're not okay with it, right? Failure is not an option. But change is all about, trying and failing. If you're going to fail, make sure that it's low cost, fail early and often so we can have a better, much more durable solution that you come up with, right? But you don't
yeah,
take months and years to fail
that's
quick,
exactly.
right?
Yeah,
But that tolerance of failure, that's a leadership style, right?
yeah. And it takes quick decision making, right? You can't, and one of those areas that we look at is how do you make decisions quick to start trying things and moving the ball forward, without jeopardizing, um, crashing the ship or sinking the ship. How do you test these things, right? Can we make that turn? Can we extend that limit of that ship a little bit without really tipping it over or something, right? We need to keep moving on those facets, right?
Yeah.
And when you look at that, we really, you got to really start thinking about the realities of this digital change, right? And a really an organizational change around technology is, what is your current culture today, right? I
Yeah.
mean, is it ready for change? Do you need a primate to get to change? What does that look like, right? And are you guys able to be a digitally native culture, right? Can you actually infuse your organization to really drive data insights on decision making? Uh, that's a question that needs to be asked, and the answer a lot of times is yes, but how much are you willing to invest to get to that point, and does it make sense, right?
There
So
is one other aspect to it. Organizationally, like an information or CIO organization, information technology organization, is traditionally tasked with, reducing costs, making sure that you're not taking on too much risk. So really, kind of risk mitigation. And a lot of companies that reports under a CFO, believe it or not, that I've seen, but really the focus is on infrastructure and cost reduction, and they're really treated as a cost center. But if you think about digital, the new age digital is about, revenue creation or new opportunities, new strategies, right? So that's a cultural shift in the organization. You have to be thinking differently about your technology organization and the changes that that can bring to you in a different light.
yeah, I mean, you're right. I mean, how to really get more out of your customers, serve your customers,
That's your
right?
number one job, right?
That's
You
your number
exist
one job. It's like
because of your
customer
customers.
centric. How can we do more for them, right? Whether it's being more efficient and creating more, you know, price pressures, or becoming more competitive, whether it's being able to understand your product life cycle. I mean, we had a segment in this, I believe it was podcast 5 or 6, that we talked about, how this really benefits the customer, right?
Yep.
And those areas are going to be some of the key areas that you're going to have to start figuring out. That change is the degree of change is what we call it, is really how much time and effort. You just labeled it very, eloquently. Each function across cross function organizations, they're doing their day to day. You know, most companies will not operate as saying, no, we're going to create a new role for somebody to say, hey, we're just going to have one guy try to fix all the cross function and worry about all the change. In reality, is that these cross function teams, these new digital leaders that are really in charge of the functions, are tapping into each individual resources to take that extra 10 to 15% to try the change on top of their day to day, which is not an easy
Not
task.
easy at all.
It's not easy. So to understand the effort, the degree of change of your current culture to where you're trying to get to, is you got to take that into the to your overall equation on if you're really going to fail fast because your people didn't want to do it, or you're going to fail fast because man they went at it, they tried it, but it just didn't work,
Yeah.
right? So
Yeah, the cultural aspect, and we hear about this whole agile, obviously from a development,
correct, yeah,
perspective, right? Continuous integration, continuous CI/CD, and all that. So that's all great, but I think the agile way of thinking has to really crisscross all parts of the organization, right? That's why it's a cultural mindset and not somewhat of a programmatic approach to development, right? You have to be open to change. You have to be open to trying something new and knowing that, hey, we tried and it didn't work. If you didn't try, you'll never know, right?
yeah,
And so you know, that confidence to really lead that change and say, let's try it. Let's that's truly cultural, right? It's just not just engineering organization that has to, follow that approach.
yeah. And it's a very important piece that you make there, right? That most organizations really look at, when you start choosing the types of transformational projects that you want to work on, there's a very good possibility that these are going to fail. But how can you build off of these failures? Are these digital projects that you're working on really maybe touching two or three things in your organization? Maybe two paths didn't work, but two still have legs, and we know that certain things are working for certain areas and certain paths and functions, right?
Yeah.
So you're getting wins, you're getting visibility, you're understanding what works within your organization across some of these technologies, but you're learning, right? It's not just
Yeah.
failing. You're learning as you fail to figure out what works within your culture, your current culture, and you need to really identify whether if it's the it's a people thing, the degree of change,
Or is it a
the effort,
technology thing?
or is it a technology thing? You got to really look and weigh those out to really figure out what's really bringing the failures, right? Learn from that. Take some of that away. And as we start looking at that degree of change, time and effort, you know, do do organizations really have a good idea what that change looks like in the future? They're going down these paths. What does that look like in the future, right?
That's a great question, right? I'm not going to venture into answering that, but I do want to say though that with the change, you know, when you describe the change as a technology adoption, right? Organization looks at it as technology. Whereas if you communicate a vision for the organization, no matter what technology you choose, what technology you start with or fail with or be successful with, you're essentially communicating a change as a go forward strategy, not necessarily a technology. We're going to change no matter what. If not this, then something else.
Correct. So basically, the path of where they want to go, they're striving, they're reaching for the path of what they would like to see their future organization be like. Where they get to that is determined by how much they actually go through some of these digital initiatives and evaluate technologies and understand how the adoption will get them there. They may not get to that ultimate goal, but they're striving to be 50%, 60%, 70%, whatever that path is, at least for the interim, before they get to the next step, right? They need to kind of show those gains, and we call those short-term wins, or how that affects the organization overall.
'Cause that's important to bring them along. Yeah.
Yeah, you have to build that confidence and make sure that the organization is adopting these things in a way that is really transformational, right? So, and one thing too is, you can start to measure this through a vast variety of means, but how do you really see, does it always have to be tangible, or can organizations really feel the intangible benefit of that culture shifting, right? Which is a very interesting question. A lot of people don't like to talk about intangible, value as one thing that can bring to an organization, but there is cases where that's going to happen quite a bit. And how do you actually continue on without showing actual cost savings or revenue generation?
Yeah, but everything about digital transformation you may not be able to measure in quantifiable terms. That's the reality, and that's something that organizations probably have already come to terms with, right? There are going to be tangible aspects of it, but not everything will be. But that doesn't mean that you don't do anything that have clear and tangible benefits that is shown immediately in short term, right? But like you said, cultural change is incredibly key to the digital transformation success. But how do you really measure it, right?
Yeah. And it's tricky. It can be a little tricky, but you can feel it. But you can't put a price on the way your organization is going and feeling, right, on the culture, right?
Well, great conversation.
Absolutely.
We can wrap it up right there. I want to make a point about other locations where our audience can find us. Obviously, as a podcast, this is on all podcast platforms, but we're also on YouTube. These videos are up on YouTube channel. Look for Digital Twin Podcast. We're also on Twitter, Digital Twin Cast. You can also find us on Facebook. Come follow us. Make sure to subscribe to this and send us your feedback. We'd love to hear from you. And any suggestions on new topics are also welcome.
Great. Well, we'll see you then.
Thank you very much. Be safe.